Hi everybody, I'm Heather from The Painted Pine. I'm so happy to be able to be with you tonight to do this sign workshop with you. So thank you so much for the invitation and I'm really looking forward to a good night. So in your kit you should have your piece of wood, you should have whatever your stencil is. You should also have a a colored sponge, doesn't matter what color it is. And you should have a couple of these white triangular sponges, and we'll be using those later on, so you don't need to have them right in your hand right now. And you should also have a piece of sandpaper. So yours is probably a blue square, mine is brown, but it doesn't matter. So we're going to get started right in tonight with sanding our piece of wood. Now at any time through the night, this is just a video, so at any time through the night, if you need to stop and pause and wait, just click pause and then you can rewind if you need to, or pause and play as you need to as well. So the first thing we're going to do is just sand around the edges of our sign and sand along the top of our sign. And when you're sanding your top of your sign, you just want to make sure that you're going with the groove of the paint, of the wood. So just take a look and see which way the grain of your wood seems to be moving and go in long strokes. You never want to do circular sanding because you'll leave little grooves in your wood. So nice straight sanding. All right, and there we go. The next step that we're going to do once you're completely sanded is we're going to paint our background color. So for your background color, think about contrasting colors. If you have a darker background, to choose lighter lettering, or if you have a lighter background, for darker lettering. So today I'm going to be doing a white background, and I'm going to choose a darker charcoal gray and some red for my lettering. So that'll stand out really nicely. So for your background, you're going to use your colored sponge, all right? And you're just going to take a little bit on the edge of your sponge. So you don't need a ton at a time. You don't want it to be drippy and too thick or too wet. You just want like a nice thin coat all the way around. So I always start around the outside edges of my sign because it just helps me not to get too much paint on my hands, but you don't need to. You can start however you want. So I do all four edges. And then I'm going to do my top. Again, you want nice long lines. You don't want to be doing circles or swirls. So once you get your paint down, just nice long lines to cover your board in a thin coat of paint. So not too thick or goopy because you need it to dry. Okay. Now, if you're using white paint, that might be the only paint that you want a second coat on. And if you are doing a second coat, then you're going to let it dry completely and then give it a light sand and then put a second coat on. But generally one coat should be enough for your background. And there we go. That shouldn't take you too long. Once you have your coat of paint done, you're just going to let it dry, probably 15 or 20 minutes. Just let it air dry. You'll know it's completely dry once there's no sheen to it, and you can touch it to your hand, of course, and no paint comes off. All right, so we'll pause there until your paint is dry and meet me back here in a minute. All right, so now that your board is nice and dry, now comes the fun part. We're going to put our stencil on our board. Now with your stencil, take a look and just kind of line it up however you think it's going to look nice on your sign. So whichever direction that you like, and generally it should about fit the piece of wood that you have. Don't worry if any of the blue hangs over a little bit. That's just the stencil part. What you want to make sure is that all of the white lettering that's there is actually on the sign and no little bits are hanging off it. So generally it should fit your square sign. So what you're going to do is, if you have something hard that you have, like maybe a gift card or something like that in your bag or something around, you're just going to take that and just burnish along the edges of it. If you don't have something, you can definitely just do it with your fingers. You just want to make sure that it's really attached. The stencil comes in 3 parts. There's the transfer tape on the top, there's a blue stencil in the middle, and then on the back is the backing paper. So we're going to take the backing paper off our stencil, and this is really an important part. So if you make sure that you're all at the same stage to watch, or that you can pause it and rewind it to watch that part on the video again too. So once you have your sign kind of eyeballed and lined up, if you've got any spaces or where you want it to land, this is really important. You're going to turn the sign, your stencil, upside down so that all of the grid marks and everything are facing you. To take the backing off, you're just going to start at one corner of the stencil. It doesn't matter which corner, a top, a bottom. I'm usually a top left person, but that's just me. So you can do it whichever way you like. And you can see that as I'm lifting the backing of the stencil up, I'm left with the sticky blue stencil exposed. And that's exactly what you want to see. Okay, so you're just going to peel this backing away. Make sure as you're pulling it back that no little blue bits show up on here. So you don't want the inside of an A or some little part of your letter or design. See how that one has come up? So you don't want that to stay on here. You need that to stay on your stencil. So if that happens, just lay your little piece down again, give it a rub with your finger, okay, and then it will stick back down again. So if that happens, okay, sometimes the little bits are a bit fiddly inside. Okay, otherwise you're just going to peel it off. Now these pieces, I cut these and I save them to put paint on, so you're welcome to do that, but otherwise we don't need that piece again. And now what we're going to do with our stencil is we're going to turn it over and place it on our sign. Now this is kind of you get one chance to do this, so just make sure you take your time with it, because once your stencil is turned over and the sticky side is on your sign, it's stuck there. So make sure you're just kind of taking your time, okay? And then just line it up how you want it to land. And then once you're happy with it, okay, then you can commit to it, and you're just going to take your hands and press your stencil right down. Okay, so you're just going to press that down, make sure it's nice and attached. If you've got lots of little fiddly bits, you can take your fingers, just press over each of them, because what you're really trying to do is seal that white part. When I've cut your stencil, I cut it on an electronic cutter, and then I go through with a little weeding tool and I pull out all of these letters and all of the insides. So what you're seeing here is actually the background paint, okay, the white of my background. So whatever color your background is going to show through. And that's the part where our paint's going to go. So you just want to make sure you have a nice little seal along there to help stop any paint bleeding. Once you have it at this spot, then you're going to peel your transfer tape up. And if you need to pause here till everyone gets their stencil down so you can do it, please feel free to pause the video. Okay, I'm going to continue now with taking the transfer tape off the top. You probably have 2 pieces on your sign of transfer tape, and it doesn't really matter where you start pulling it off, but what's really important with the transfer tape that's different than your backing is that when you peel it, you want to keep your fingers flat on your stencil. The reason we do this is because the stencil film itself is really fine. So it's quite thin, and you don't want to tear it or stretch it. And if you pull the transfer tape off like this, it can stretch or tear your stencil underneath. Okay, again, you want to be really careful that you're not getting any little blue bits, that your stencil is attached completely to your sign, but just keeping it flat as you're rolling it off your sign. This may take you a little longer than it takes me, because I've done this a few times. So don't worry if you're not moving as quickly as I am on here. You do want to be careful with it, because if you do rip or stretch your stencil, then your sign, you know, it's going to be just a little trickier to complete. So just take your time. And just remember to let your fingers do the walking. Keep it walking along. Okay, until all the transfer tape is off. And literally what this transfer tape does is it just holds all these little inside bits in the right spot to put onto your sign. So we don't need this anymore. It can just go into the garbage. And you should be left with your stencil on your sign. Okay? Once you're finished and you have this stencil attached to your sign, you're going to do something that sounds a little bit crazy. You're going to take your colored sponge that you had from your background. You don't need to add a lot more paint to it. It probably still is wet enough from the beginning. But you're going to do one light coat of whatever your background color is to your sign, okay? And you can see I'm just giving it a light wipe. I'm not really reapplying paint. I'm not doing this for any, you know, thick amount of paint at all, just nice, thin little wipe of paint. What this does is, this is just one of my little tricks for helping your sign, the paint not to bleed on your sign. So number one, sanding your board really well helps with not bleeding. But number two, putting a coat of the base color on your sign first really helps your sign not to bleed, because it helps to seal in all those little edges of your letters and where the stencil is. So again, we're just going to pause for a minute or two, 5 minutes maybe, to let that base coat dry. Okay, of the same coat that you did yours. You can pause the video and you can join me back here in just a few minutes once your base coat is dry. All right, welcome back. So hopefully by now your sign is dry. You have your background, you've got your thin coat over top of your background color, and we're ready to start our stenciling. So I've chosen for my sign two colors. I'm using a charcoal and I'm using a red. And this is what you're going to use your little makeup sponges for. I'm going to show you, I like these sponges better than either trying to use like a regular sponge, something like this, or a paintbrush, because they're really nice and dense. So you don't get lots of air bubbles. It gives it a nice, good quality finish. So it'll look really nice and smooth. The key to these letters is, again, not using too much paint. So you want to make sure, you'd rather do two thin coats of paint than have one big, thick coat of paint, okay? So the theme of tonight is no thick paint. So watch your buddy beside you. Make sure they don't have any thicker, goopy paint. What you're going to do is you're going to dab your sponge. Just hold it like a little triangle wedge this way, okay? And then dab your sponge in the paint so that, and then just kind of pat it off so that it looks practically dry, okay? You don't want to have dripping paint on your sponge. So nice and dry. And then the action that you're going to do with your paint on your sponge is you're just going to pat up and down and up and down. So I'm going to try and hold this up. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see better this way or not, but I'm just going to pounce my hand up and down. Never swirl it, never wipe it. Okay, always just think up and down. And when you do your first coat, it will look pretty chalky, or it might look uneven, and that's okay. All right. So it can kind of look like that. You don't want it to look totally finished because again, we're after just thin coats of paint. The second coat you'll see once you go to do it will make it look absolutely perfect. So just nice, light, you don't have to press really hard, up and down motion. Okay, now I tend to do it pretty quickly, but you could move at a bit of a slower pace, but it doesn't have to be too slow and precise. Just think up and down, working all the way across. Now you're going to be tempted too at this point to look back and say, oh, I missed a spot. I want to go back and touch it up right now. But don't do that, because if you take wet paint and you put it on top of wet paint, it will just peel up the paint that's already there. It'll kind of absorb it. And then you'll feel like you're in a bit of a mess. Okay, so just let it dry. Don't worry if you've got some little bits that you have missed or that aren't completely covered, because our second coat will absolutely do that. Now, when you're working at your sign, I tend to work from top to bottom. You can definitely work one color at a time. So for me, I would start at the top and do everything that I have that I want in this charcoal color. I'm just going to continue with my charcoal color on my sponge. Okay, there's no real rhyme or reason to it. You can do it however you like. If you've got little bits, so if you have like a little wreath that has holly berries or something like that on it, you can save some of your transfer tape, or you can take a piece of painter's tape and you can cover over sections while you're painting to protect it a bit if you want. Okay, so you don't have to worry about being totally precise all the way across, but just cover it with something if you've got a little tiny nook or cranny that you want in a different color. Okay, so I've just finished up my first coat of my charcoal, and now I'm going to move on to my red. The thing you'll notice about red paint, if you're using it, is that red, for some reason, it's just the pigments in it. The red on the first coat might appear to be thin, or it might appear to be pinkish. But don't worry, because your second coat will make a nice rich color, and paint always dries just a little bit darker than what you have going on the first coat. So there I am, I've got my first coat on there. Okay, and you can see probably, or I hope you can see, how it looks very light, and some of the spots may have been missed a bit. I haven't missed anything completely, so you want to try your best to cover what you can, but don't be worried if you've got some little gray spots or little, whatever color you're using, if it's just a little bit lighter. I find that once I get down to the bottom of my sign, if I'm working top to bottom, that I can pretty much start back up at the top again if I've done a nice thin coat with my second coat of paint. And as I put my hand on here, this is dry already. So you do want 2 thin coats of paint. If you start getting into 3 or 4 coats of paint, it gets too thick and it will peel up, and it's not necessary. Okay, so 2 thinner coats will do it. And you'll see, if you take a look up, or if you want to rewind in a few minutes, if you take a look up, that the second coat just makes the biggest difference in coverage and in all your letters. So you will be able to 100% see the difference in my top word compared to my other ones. Okay, so that second coat is really the key. Okay, I'm going to set this down to keep going so I don't miss any spots on my second coat, because this is where you do need to be a bit particular. Okay, so really be mindful of where you're putting your paint. All right, so once all of your sign has been painted, you've done your 2 coats and they're nice and dry, so you let them really, really dry. Make sure they're nice and dry. Then we're gonna peel the stencil off the backing. Now, at this point, you wanna be careful with it, but you don't have to be overly worried if it rips or if there's a little tear in it or something, okay? So you can start at any corner that you like of your sign and just start to peel the stencil away. And this is the moment I really love, because when you look at your sign looking like this, you think, oh my goodness, what a mess. How is this even gonna turn out looking all right? And then it's just such a beautiful moment because you peel it away and it's like, oh, it looks amazing. So just carefully pull all your little bits and pieces. If you have little insides of letters and those sorts of things, you can take them out with just your fingers. If you have fingernails and fingers, you could use a toothpick, you could use a safety pin just to carefully lift some inside out bits if you need a little bit of help with it, okay? Because sometimes the insides of your letters, like A's and E's, that kind of stuff, need a little help to pull out, okay? But you can see it's just kind of ripping a little bit. I'm still being careful and taking my time with it. I'll tell you, the first time I ever made a sign, I was too nervous to pull the stencil off myself. It was a very nerve-wracking experience for me. So it might be for you too. So don't worry, you're not alone. It seems funny, but it's true, because you're in the final stages and we're pretty excited about seeing the sign. And we don't want anything to go wrong. But at this stage, it's just a matter of taking your stencil off. I have a little weeding tool that I use just to make things easier, but otherwise you can just use your finger to get the little bits. And once you have all your little bits and pieces off, there you go, you've got your finished sign. If you want to, you can distress the edges. You can take your sandpaper and just go along the edges to distress your edges and make it look a little more rustic. Or you can leave it kind of that clean classic look and just not sand the edges as well. So there you go. I hope you had a great time tonight. Thank you so much for having me. I would really love to see some of your pictures of your finished sign. And if you want to follow me, The Painted Pine, we're on Facebook and we're on Instagram. I'd love to have you follow me there as well for more signs and tips and tricks and new designs. So have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And remember, post your signs.